Good afternoon. I am Tosca Bruno van Vijveken and I work at the Transnational NGO Initiative, which is housed in the Moynihan Institute of Global Affairs at Syracuse University in the Maxwell School. Today I'm interviewing Marshal Ganz, Senior Public Lecturer at Harvard, the Kennedy School of Government. Did I mention your title right?
It's the Senior Lecturer in Public Policy.
Senior Lecturer in Public. I knew I had something right and something wrong. Thank you, Marshal, for agreeing to talk to us this afternoon. Tell us first a little bit, what is the nature of your research and your practice, frankly?
Yeah, the teaching, research, and practice all seem to overlap as being about a common set of challenges and questions. How to develop leadership that is able to mobilize collective action, to create the capacity, the power to make change. And so the research is on how that works in the context of social movements, civic associations, so forth. The practice is similarly in the context of social movements, civic associations. And what I teach is a course on organizing, and do a distance learning version and an in-person version, and a course on public narrative.
So really, to explain to our audience for a moment, you are really focusing on a field that is not so much focused on formally registered NGOs, whether they're domestic or transnational, but on other forms of civic agency and collective action that are more community driven and organized.
It's focused on the question of how communities, how ordinary people can empower themselves through collective action to wield political, economic, cultural influence. And so that's what the focus is. So to the extent that an NGO is able to facilitate that, that's great. Sometimes it happens through the support of NGOs, sometimes faith community context, sometimes trade unions, sometimes political parties, and sometimes as civic associations. So the core interest of me is how you shift power downward,
right?
So that people are able to exercise it on behalf of their own needs and concerns.
Okay, and now you've immediately very nicely explained to me how your research agenda relates to that of NGOs that we tend to focus on here. How did you personally first become interested in activism?
Well, I got involved in the civil rights movement when I was an undergraduate at Harvard. And getting involved in the civil rights movement took me to Mississippi in 1964, where I actually got my political education about power and community and leadership and sort of how real change to occur has to be authored by the people who need the change, that it won't come from people who are benefiting from the way things are. And that there's a craft to that. And I got involved in that because of my family's experience living in Germany after the Second World War. My father was a chaplain in the army, and meeting people who'd survived the Holocaust and coming to understand that not as a consequence simply of anti-Semitism, but of racism, and being raised at Passover Seders, where the whole story was about the struggle of civil rights, only in a different context. And thirdly, because it was a movement of my peers. It was a movement of young people who had found the hope to act on their critical view of the world. And I admired them, and it was hard to come up with reasons why I shouldn't do what they were doing.
And your personal story is really interesting because you started at undergraduate level at Harvard College, then went into years and years of organizing, and then came back to academia and stayed here to reflect. That's a fairly unusual story, no?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that sort of the idea that learning is something only for the youth misses the whole point.
Yeah.
And that there is a kind of learning that young people do and need to do, but there's other points in our lives when learning is very, very important, in fact, throughout our lives.
And learning from practice and feeding that back into academia is a rewarding thing.
It's very rewarding. And so I was going to say that it sort of went activism, then it went reflection, like that was more like digging into social science and using that lens to re-examine my experience with, and then turning it into teaching, which is yet a third form, and deeply resonant with what I've always done.
Yeah, indeed, yes. Okay, my last question will be so you have observed nonprofits in the American context and NGOs, but more from the point of view of social movement actors. For those NGOs who feel that they need to connect better with less structured forms of civic agency, such as through social movement, community-based movements and activism and so on, what would you recommend to them in terms of capacities, understanding, or leadership skills that they need to learn and adopt in order to better connect with those movements?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think they need to get clear on what is an NGO they're trying to support. I mean, are they trying to provide services that aren't being provided? Are they trying to offer education that's not being offered? Or are they trying to cultivate the development of capacity that doesn't exist, i.e. power? And because social movements are all about trying to develop power. But of course, that disturbs the equilibrium of the status quo, which is of course the whole point. And so it puts some NGOs in a very problematic position, because to sort of really advance their values, they have to figure out how they can support the development of entities, whether movements or whatever, that challenge the status quo. But on the other hand, they're operating within the context of the status quo. And so there's a real dilemma there. And I think it's sort of like, if they can find ways that they can support the development of the capacity of these groups to be more effective, without trying to tell them what campaigns to run or how to run campaigns, and accept that there's going to be a lot of, what may be very challenging things happen. Because change doesn't happen, just like, thank you very much. I mean, it's a ragged process, and it's a challenging process. And there's something different about the mentality, or the, not mentality really, but about the orientation of, my job is to carry out a program with these goals by this time in this way with this many people, and my mission is to figure out how to help a community discover its capacity to challenge sources of oppression. They're really different enterprises, and one is very all about creativity and innovation and adaptation, and the other one is much more about efficiency and effectiveness. And I think understanding that difference, I think, would be real helpful. And then anything an NGO could do to support the capacity building of local groups, including helping them bridge local to regional and national gaps, which I think is very, very important, would be very constructive.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this short interview. I appreciate it.
Thank you.